Heroes Like Us is a series intended at sharing comic book characters from various backgrounds and identities. We won't always get everything right, so feel free to make amendments and corrections in the comments. They're always appreciated. What's not appreciated, however, is any form of hate speech or intolerance, so comments of that nature will be immediately deleted and those users blocked from this channel. This is a place of education and celebration. Welcome to I'm Your Target Demographic. Today we are talking about the U.S. Marine Corps. If you were in the Marines or any branch of service, down in the comments, let us know, what branch you were in, and hopefully you enjoy this video. We've got a handful of Marines here that we're going to talk about, but make sure you also check out our other videos about the Army, and we've got one coming up about the Air Force. There will not be a video for Navy or Coast Guard, at least until we can find more characters that served in those branches. So let's dive in. The first character that we're going to talk about today is Frank Castle, the Punisher from Marvel Comics. When Frank Castle was first introduced, he was part of the Vietnam War, and he served there as a Marine. But because Marvel has a sliding timeline, they're kind of always adjusting what war he was a part of. So regardless, he comes back in between his tours, he gets married, he has 2 kids, he's home on leave, enjoying time with his family, and they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And his family is killed by some mobsters that didn't want witnesses to something that was going on. So this now triggers this kind of anger in him that no one will do anything, the police won't stand up to the mob. So he takes it on himself and he becomes the Punisher. He has no supernatural abilities, no superhuman abilities, but he has training and weapons and drive to take out all the crime in New York City and beyond New York City. Recently, Frank Castle has had some interesting arcs in the comic, including wearing the War Machine armor, which is like an Iron Man suit with guns and all sorts of stuff. He did that for a while in order to take out crime. And then there's a futuristic story in which Frank Castle becomes a ghost rider, who then becomes a Herald of Galactus, eventually meets Thanos and becomes kind of the second hand to Thanos. So this cosmic ghost rider character, then finds time travel, finds Thanos as a baby, raises him to not become Thanos, but instead raises him to become another Frank Castle. And so now we have a Thanos that is a Punisher. It's just some crazy stories. But if you're interested in that, just look up Cosmic Ghost Rider and what to read, and you'll see some interesting Frank Castle stuff. He was featured recently in Netflix in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, played by John Bernthal. Up next from DC Comics, we've got the Green Lantern John Stewart. John was a Marine, he was also an architect. So he uses these skills, and when he's chosen as the second, kind of the replacement to Hal Jordan when Hal can't do something, John Stewart is able to conjure up these constructs that are incredibly complicated, incredibly vast, using his military mind, using his architecture background, and he's able to really creatively use the Green Lantern ring to do some major damage and do some major good. Up next from DC Comics, we've got Azrael Michael Lane. Now, Michael Lane was a football player in college, eventually enlisted in the Marines, did a tour in Iraq, came home, became a police officer. Now, he was then recruited into something called the Order of Purity. Yes, Order of Purity. To basically become their mercenary, their weapon Azrael. So when he becomes Azrael, he gets a suit to wear, and he gets 2 swords. He gets the Sword of Sin, which basically makes people feel this guilt, kind of everything they've done. And then he gets the Sword of Salvation, which is kind of an ethereal sword that makes people kind of feel regret and want to repent. And so he uses these to kind of fight crime and act as the weapon of this kind of holy order. Up next from Marvel Comics, we've got the character Moon Knight Mark Spector. Now, Mark, when he was a kid, had this really traumatic incident where a rabbi that he thought was friendly turned out to actually be a Nazi deserter, and it kind of was this really traumatic incident. And this moment started to fracture Mark's mind. And so then he enlisted in the Marines, but slowly they started to see the disassociation that was happening. And so they eventually kind of said, you gotta go. Now Mark eventually just kind of becomes a mercenary, and he's on this job in Egypt, and he's lethally injured. But he's in this tomb, and the Egyptian god Khonshu comes down to him and says, if you will be my vessel, my warrior, I'll save you. So of course he does this, and he becomes the character Moon Knight. Now it's really unsure what powers he's given by Khonshu, because Mark is a very unreliable narrator. And so as he's telling you things that he's done or things he can do, you're always kind of questioning if that's real. So now he fights crime, and he kind of has various personalities that do various things for him. You know, they have different strengths and weaknesses, but he's managing to kind of control them, and even sees Khonshu as a way of like kind of deciding how he acts and how these personalities take over. Up next for Marvel Comics, we've got the character Blue Marvel, Adam Brashear. Now Adam is a genius, a prodigy. He has 2 PhDs, and he then enlisted in the Marines to fight in the Korean War. Now, he became a superhero early on because he was part of this explosion that kind of allowed him to become like a fusion reactor, but for this like negative energy. And so he's able to create this energy, which is incredibly powerful, and it makes him this Superman kind of character that could, they say he could, you know, split a planet in half with a punch. He is basically invulnerable. He can, you know, a hydrogen bomb can go off in his hands and nothing happens to him. So a long time ago, he, you know, back in the 60s, he's fighting crime. He has this mask on, no one knows who he is. And he's about to be rewarded by the president when he's in this battle. And his mask comes off and people realize that he's a black man. And during that time, this was unheard of. And so basically he's kind of pushed off, you know, to the sidelines for a while. And they basically say like, hey, we don't really want you out here fighting for us. So he waits. He lives a normal life. He kind of has kids. They grow up. But now things are different. And he kind of comes back out and is now fighting crime again as the Blue Marvel. So he fights alongside the Avengers, and he does what he can to save the day when he's able to. And lastly for this video, we've got James Rhodes, the War Machine. Now Rhodes was a pilot for the Marines, and in a battle, his helicopter crashed. Luckily, Iron Man was there, comes down to the ground, and the two of them kind of fight their way out of this incident, which leads to a friendship, and then eventually Tony Stark hires Rhodes to come in, gives him a suit called the War Machine suit, which is decked out with guns and weapons, and War Machine eventually becomes a member of the Avengers and whatnot to fight crime. Now, War Machine recently in the comics was killed by the villain Thanos, but through comic book nonsense, Tony Stark is able to resurrect Rhodes, but Rhodes is now traumatized by that experience and won't get into something so confining. So instead of the War Machine suit, he now uses a tank vehicle called the Manticore to fight crime and travel. War Machine was played in the Marvel Cinematic Universe first by Terrence Howard, but then for the rest of the movies, Don Cheadle. So that is it for this video. That's a handful of Marines from both Marvel and DC Comics. Hopefully you found this interesting. Let me know down in the comments what you thought about this video. If there were other Marines that we've forgotten, we can always do a part 2. If you served in the Marines, thank you for your service. If you served in any branch, thank you. And share this video with anyone you think might find it interesting. Thanks for watching.